This adventurous story begins with a traveler named Berg, who had a deep passion for exploring different places. At the time, Berg was in South America, where he learned about the immense Amazon rainforest. With its worldwide popularity, Berg couldn't resist visiting. Without wasting any time, he gathered the necessary resources and made his way there. In South America, Berg met a professor named Marcus, who, like him, loved experiencing new things. Their shared mindset quickly turned into friendship, and they decided to continue the journey together. Soon after, they met Kevin, a photographer who had traveled across almost all of South America. Kevin could serve as a guide, so Berg and Marcus invited him to join their team. The group slowly grew, giving them more confidence. They began exploring smaller locations, not realizing that their ultimate destination would be a mysterious place deep in the Amazon, a world within Earth that would be almost impossible to return from. One day, while traveling near a port, Berg met a man named Carl. After learning a bit about Berg, Carl began explaining something intriguing. He said that while it's impressive to explore common places, there is a hidden spot in the very heart of the Amazon where people still live as humans did in the Stone Age, a tribe unknown to the outside world. It's rumored that the area is rich in resources, including diamonds, gold, and other treasures hidden underwater. Carl claimed that no one had ever reached it, and if they did, it would be one of the greatest discoveries in history, making them incredibly wealthy. Carl even showed Berg a photograph with a faint glimpse of the tribe. Already passionate about exploration, Berg was convinced. He immediately returned to Marcus and Kevin to share Carl's information. At first, they were skeptical. After all, if no one had been there before, how could Carl know so much? But Berg's confidence and persistence eventually persuaded them. Carl joined the team, making it 4 members heading into the deep forest in search of ancient humans who had never left their land. They began gathering supplies, boarded a plane, and flew toward the remote forest. They carried tents, tools, and enough food to last several days. But they knew the real challenge would begin once their resources ran out. Carl told them that if they could find these ancient humans and bring proof back, they would earn global recognition for achieving what top researchers never could. They traveled in short intervals to avoid exhaustion. One night, Carl predicted that it would rain, even though the sky was completely clear. To everyone's shock, heavy rain began just hours later. The next morning, Carl led them to a nearby tribe that welcomed them warmly, a group that had adapted modern ways while living deep in the forest. While staying there, Carl showed Berg a small piece of gold he had found in the river, proving that the legends were true. This convinced Marcus and Kevin to trust him completely. What had once seemed like a risky story now appeared to be a real and promising expedition, and they decided to continue deeper into the unknown with Carl leading the way. The problem was that reaching their destination would take several more days, and they weren't even sure they had enough resources left to make it. Everyone was exhausted, and Marcus's leg pain had gotten so bad that he couldn't walk at all. They sat down, unsure of how to continue. After much thought, Kevin suggested building a raft and traveling by river, believing it would be the easiest route and would also help them avoid the forest's wild animals. But for some reason, Carl was against the idea. He insisted they should take the forest route instead of the river, warning that the water current could suddenly increase and become dangerous. However, seeing Marcus's condition, they decided to follow Kevin's plan. Berg, Marcus, Kevin, and Carl worked together to construct a raft, tying together thick branches from trees until they had something large enough to carry them. Once they set out on the water, Carl still seemed nervous and even suggested they turn back. But it was too late. Their journey by river had already begun, and none of them knew what dangers lay ahead. At first, they made steady progress, but then the current suddenly grew stronger. The water became unstable, pushing the raft away. Carl urged them to pull to the side and continue on foot through the forest, but Kevin refused, insisting the river was the safest option. Their disagreement turned into a heated argument, and soon the raft was badly damaged. They had no choice but to stop at the riverbank. Carl immediately went ashore, saying he would gather resources for food and water. The others sat nearby, recovering from the ordeal. This was only their first real challenge in the forest, and already they were in rough shape. No one could have guessed how much worse things would get. When they tried to return to the water later, Carl refused, saying he would continue through the forest instead. Anyone who wanted to go with him could join. Since they all had maps showing the location in the center of the forest, they decided to split up. Berg and Kevin would stay with the raft and follow the river, while Marcus, whose leg had started to feel a bit better, would travel with Carl by land. The decision was partly because Kevin and Carl's argument had made it impossible for them to travel together. Berg and Kevin pushed their raft back into the river, but soon they began losing control. Felt like they were going to sink. In such situations, survival experts say panic is your worst enemy. Most rafts sink because of uneven weight distribution, which throws off balance. The key is to keep weight centered, move toward calmer waters, and angle the raft perpendicular to incoming waves to reduce the risk of tipping. Using paddles to steer away from rocks is also critical. Had Berg and Kevin applied these techniques, they might have been fine. But their raft was on the verge of being swept under. Kevin shouted to Berg that he would get to shore first and then pull him in. Kevin managed to reach the bank, but when it was Berg's turn, the current carried him farther away. Kevin tried to help, but the water was too strong. Berg was swept far downstream, out of Kevin's reach, before he managed to grab onto a large rock. Exhausted, he tried to make his way to shore, which was incredibly difficult. Eventually, he found another spot where he could pull himself out and hide under the rock's shelter. With rain starting to fall heavily, Berg knew he needed a better hiding place. But for now, he stayed behind the rocks for several hours, waiting out the storm. But now, he had no idea which part of the forest he was in. Suddenly, Berg felt a little happy because he saw his travel bag floating toward him in the water. Somehow, he managed to pull it out, and inside were plenty of resources, enough for him to survive for a few days. From the bag, he took out an energy medicine. After taking it, he felt a little stronger and started traveling again in hopes of finding Kevin. But it didn't seem like the journey was going to be easy. The problem was, Berg didn't know where he was supposed to go. If he accidentally went in the wrong direction, he could end up deep inside the forest, making it even harder to find him. That's why Berg decided to stay in one spot for an entire day and wait for Kevin. The rain kept pouring, and Berg started to get very sick. He covered himself as best as he could and kept waiting. Eventually, when he felt no one was coming, he made his own map, decided where he should head, and began a long journey. In survival situations like this, if you want your companions to find you quickly, you should leave signs along the way. Survival experts emphasize this technique because it helps rescue teams track your location, like marking a tree or scratching lines on the ground. This way, even if you keep moving, others can follow your trail. But poor Berg didn't do any of that, and he kept wandering through the forest. Hours and days went by. Berg would hide under any tree or bush at night to rest. His mental state was deteriorating because he had run out of resources and had no water. Drinking seawater would only make him sicker. At this point, he had to do what any survivalist would do: hunt forest animals to fill his stomach. Berg even climbed a tree to kill and eat a snake. Insects became his snacks. By now, he had lost hope of ever meeting his friends again, and focused only on moving toward the location he believed would lead him out. One night, while sleeping in the forest, he heard voices calling his name. Thinking his friends might be nearby, he quickly followed the sound with his flashlight, only to see Marcus standing there. But when he called out, Marcus didn't respond. Turned out no one was actually there. Berg realized he was hallucinating, imagining things that didn't exist. His toughest survival test had just begun. At night, he heard many wild animal sounds, which he drove away by lighting a small fire. But when he woke up in the morning, he found himself surrounded by bugs and noticed a leech burrowing into his forehead. The pain was intense, but he somehow pulled it out. Too weak to sit in one place, he forced himself to keep moving. Now, Berg truly began to understand how important life was. Before coming here, he had never cared about it much. But now he knew how hard survival could be. While traveling, he came across a spot with a lot of human belongings, which gave him hope that there might be a tribe nearby. But of course, no one appeared. Starving, Berg spotted 2 bird eggs in front of him. He took one, and even before killing it, he said sorry, because that's the rule of the animal kingdom. To survive, you must kill. After eating the egg, he regained a bit of energy and kept going. After such a long journey, his feet began to hurt badly. When he finally removed his shoes and socks, he saw that his feet were completely rotting, likely from constant water and dampness. At this point, Berg found himself cursing his own decisions, feeling Marcus's pain from before, when his legs had gone numb. Yet Berg had told Marcus to go with Carl. If they had all stayed together, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way. He was completely broken, even crying because he didn't believe he could survive anymore. All his life's mistakes began flashing before his eyes, but he knew he couldn't stop now. He had to keep moving. The next morning, he continued his journey deep into the forest, searching for the place Carl had described. Berg was now extremely weak and barely had the strength to walk. But when he moved forward that morning, he saw human footprints on the ground. Berg was overjoyed because he felt that Kevin might be nearby. Overcome with excitement, he moved ahead, only to notice eggshells on the ground. They were the same eggshells he had eaten from and discarded earlier, which meant he had unknowingly circled back to the same place after wandering for days. Frustrated and disheartened, Berg realized that if he had been marking his path along the way, he could have avoided this repetitive loop and found a better route. Shaken, Berg decided to search for a river, knowing that following it could lead to safety. As he walked, he suddenly stepped into quicksand. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. In such a situation, movement is deadly. The only hope is to stay completely still and hold on to something solid. If you ever find yourself stuck in the forest and see a branch or a tree nearby, you should grab onto it and try to pull yourself out, just like Berg did. Somehow, Berg managed to escape the quicksand, but his bag was left behind. He was so exhausted that he didn't feel like doing anything, yet he kept crawling forward. In his mind, one thing was clear: he was not going to die here. After going so long without food or water, his weight had dropped to nearly half, and his bones were visible. Still, Berg refused to give up. Soon, he came across a tree crawling with red ants. Stripping off his clothes, he deliberately let the ants bite him, hoping the sharp pain would shock his body into action. It worked. Berg's body was screaming in pain, but it pushed him to run. As he moved, visions of the people he loved filled his mind. Marcos, his friends, and even the mysterious woman he had imagined meeting in the forest. Amid those visions, he heard a voice say, "Don't give up." He didn't know whose voice it was, but it gave him strength. Traveling onward, Berg finally reached a riverbank. Using his wits, he gathered sticks and arranged them into a large symbol that would be visible from above. It was the perfect spot. There were no trees nearby to block the view. Now all he could do was wait. A small turtle wandered up to him, and although Berg was starving and considered killing it for food, he chose not to. Instead, he sat beside it and enjoyed the moment. At this point, he had no real hope of rescue, but he looked up at the sky and thanked God for giving him the strength to survive for so long. Surviving in a forest for days without food and water was no small feat, and Berg felt lucky to still be alive. The next morning, Berg's friend Kevin arrived at the very spot where Berg had built the symbol. Kevin, along with his companion Lee, searched for hours, convinced Berg had to be nearby, but there was no sign of him. Lee finally told Kevin that they had likely come too late. Disheartened, Kevin began heading back. As soon as he started his boat, the sound reached Berg's ears. He realized Kevin was leaving. Berg wanted to shout, but he was too weak to call out. All he could do was stand and watch. Thankfully, Kevin spotted him just in time. Rushing the boat toward him, Kevin jumped out and embraced his friend, shocked that Berg had survived all these days. Kevin brought Berg back to civilization, where everyone, from the forest officer to the townsfolk, was stunned to see him alive. They told him that many days had passed since he went missing. With proper treatment, Berg slowly recovered. However, no one knew what had happened to Mark and Carl, who had also entered the forest. Whether they had been found by the local tribe or failed to survive remained a mystery. And with that, our adventure story comes to an end.